All right, so today we're going to dive into something that I think a lot of people kind of put off thinking about for as long as possible,
Yeah.
but it's really important.
Uh-huh.
And that is, all of the financial considerations that come up as we transition from retirement
Right.
into, the rest of life and ultimately
Yeah.
passing on and leaving a legacy and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's not always the most pleasant topic,
I know.
but it's really crucial, I think, for peace of mind
Absolutely.
and for quality of life
Yeah.
and making sure things are set up the way we want them to be.
Uh-huh.
Um, and we've got a great resource to guide us through this today.
Yeah, definitely.
This is from Fazioli Publishing.
Yep.
And it is 13 Retirement to Death, Where You Should Be Financially.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is actually part of a larger series.
It is, yeah.
It's called the Newborn to Tombstone series.
That's right.
So it's really interesting because they're looking at, personal finance across the lifespan.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And this particular installment is really focused on, as the title says,
Yeah.
retirement to death.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about making sure that you're financially secure and you've got things in order for this later stage of life.
Absolutely.
So what we're going to try to do in this deep dive is extract the most important considerations
Okay.
so that it's not too overwhelming.
Right.
And we can really provide you with some clear and actionable insights.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
So let's start, I guess, with something pretty fundamental.
Okay.
And that's estate planning.
Sure. Yeah.
So when we think about estate planning, the Fazioli piece really emphasizes the importance of having a legally valid will.
Yeah, that's key.
And that's really your final instructions
Absolutely.
for how your assets are going to be distributed after you're gone and making sure that those wishes are legally recognized and carried out.
Yeah, really spells things out.
Exactly. Now, beyond just a will, the source also talks about the advantages of using trusts.
Yeah, trust can be pretty useful.
So what is it about a trust that makes it, maybe a better option in some cases or offers additional benefits?
Well, one thing that's really interesting about trusts is that they can help your beneficiaries avoid probate.
Oh.
Which is often a lengthy and very public process.
Yeah.
And it can tie up assets for a long time.
Right.
And incur a lot of costs and legal fees and all that.
Makes sense.
So a trust can kind of bypass all of that.
Oh, I see.
And also trusts give you a lot more control over how and when your assets are distributed.
Oh, okay.
So say you have specific wishes for how your children or grandchildren should receive their inheritance. Maybe you want to set up like staggered distributions or, set certain conditions on when they can access the funds.
I see.
A trust lets you do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially if you have, more complex family situations.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if you're really looking out for future generations.
Absolutely.
Now, when we're talking about a will, there's that key person who's named to the varia, who is responsible for making sure everything's followed.
Oh, yeah.
What do they call that person again?
That's the executor.
Executor,
yeah.
Right? And Fazioli really stresses the importance of choosing someone you trust implicitly for that role, because they're the ones who are going to be managing your estate.
That's right.
Paying off any debts.
Yeah, all the bills.
Taxes. And ultimately making sure that your assets are distributed according to your wishes.
Yeah, big job.
Huge job, yeah. So that's someone you really want to choose carefully.
Definitely.
Now, moving beyond the formal will.
Okay.
The source also talks about beneficiary designations.
Right.
And this might seem pretty straightforward, but it sounds like it's something you really need to pay close attention to.
It is, because a lot of people don't realize that beneficiary designations can sometimes override what's in your will.
Oh, wow.
So say your will says one thing.
Okay.
But your retirement account beneficiary form says something else.
I see.
The beneficiary form usually takes precedence.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So you really want to make sure that those are accurate and up to date.
Yeah, that's important.
Especially after, any major life events.
Right.
Like a marriage or a divorce, or, if you have children or grandchildren.
Okay, so those need to be kept up to date.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about contingent beneficiaries?
Yeah, that's a good point.
The source mentions that.
And
it seems like a good idea.
It is. It's like a backup plan.
Right.
So if your primary beneficiary, were to pass away before you...
Oh, okay.
The contingent beneficiary would step in.
I see.
And make sure that your assets still go to the people you want them to.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Instead of, maybe getting tied up in probate or distributed.
Yeah.
according to some kind of, intestacy law.
Right, right.
Which might not be what you want at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's good to have that backup.
Now, the source also mentions POD accounts.
Oh, yeah, payable on death accounts.
Payable on death, yeah.
Those are interesting.
What's the advantage of those?
Well, they're really streamlined.
Okay.
It's a way to directly transfer, specific assets, like a bank account, to a named individual when you pass away.
Okay.
And it avoids probate.
Oh, I see.
So it can really simplify things.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And think about a different scenario.
Sure.
What if you're still alive, but for whatever reason, you're no longer capable of managing your own financial affairs?
Yeah, like if you become incapacitated.
Exactly. And the Fazioli Guide brings up the importance of a financial power of attorney.
Absolutely.
So what is that exactly?
Basically, it's a legal document
where
you appoint someone you trust to make financial decisions on your behalf if you're unable to do so yourself. Okay.
So, if you were to become ill or injured and couldn't manage your own finances, this person would step in.
That makes sense.
And, pay your bills, manage your investments.
Okay.
Whatever needs to be done.
That's important.
Yeah, it's all about having someone you trust to act in your best interests.
Right.
When you can't do it yourself.
Yeah. And it's not just about choosing someone you like, is it?
No, not at all.
There's more to it than that.
You really need to be specific about the scope of their authority. So, you can say exactly what they can and can't do.
Right.
Like maybe they can manage investments, but they can't sell your house.
I see.
Or, you can set whatever limits you feel comfortable with.
That's really important.
Yeah, it's all about protecting yourself and making sure your wishes are respected.
Have you thought about what responsibilities you would want someone to handle for you in that kind of situation?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah.
Now, similarly, when we think about healthcare decisions, the source brings up advanced healthcare directives.
Right, those are crucial.
And it seems like this is just as important as getting your financial affairs in order.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah.
So the Fazioli piece talks about two main things here.
Okay.
The living will and the healthcare proxy.
Okay, so two different things.
Yeah.
Can you explain each of those?
Sure. So the living will is basically a document where you state your preferences for medical treatment.
Okay.
In case you become unable to make those decisions yourself.
I see.
So it covers things like life support, resuscitation, those kinds of major medical interventions.
Okay, so it's really about what kind of treatment you would or would not want.
Yeah, exactly.
In certain situations.
Yeah.
And then what about the healthcare proxy?
So the healthcare proxy is also sometimes called a medical power of attorney. And that's where you designate a specific person to make those healthcare decisions for you.
Right.
If you can't make them yourself.
Okay, so one's about the treatment and one's about who makes the decisions.
That's right.
If you can't.
Yeah, it's important to have both.
Now, another thing that a lot of people worry about is long-term care as we age.
Yeah.
Potentially needing assisted living or nursing home care. And the source really addresses that as a significant financial consideration.
It does. It talks about how those costs can really add up.
Yeah, they can be huge.
Yeah, and it encourages you to plan ahead.
Right.
Think about how you're going to cover those potential expenses.
So what are some of the options that they suggest?
Well, long-term care insurance is one.
Okay.
But that can be expensive.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And not everyone has it.
So what if you don't have long-term care insurance?
Well, they mentioned some other possibilities.
Right.
Like maybe using annuities that have a long-term care rider.
I see.
Or, setting aside specific savings to cover those costs.
That makes sense.
And what's interesting is they also talk about budgeting for home modifications.
Oh, yeah.
If your goal is to age in place.
Yeah.
Things like making your home wheelchair accessible or installing grab bars.
Right.
That can all add up, too.
You don't always think about those costs, but they're real.
Right.
All right, so let's move on to another topic that isn't always fun to think about.
Okay.
But is definitely a reality, and that's taxes. Specifically inheritance taxes.
Yeah.
The source touches on planning in this area.
It does. It says it's really important for maximizing what you can leave to your loved ones.
Okay.
So they suggest a few different strategies. One thing is Roth conversions. So that's where you basically pay taxes on your traditional retirement accounts now.
Okay.
So that the withdrawals in retirement are tax-free.
I see.
And potentially for your beneficiaries, too.
So you're kind of paying the taxes up front. That's right.
To avoid them later on.
Yeah, it can be a good strategy.
Interesting.
Especially if you think you'll be in a higher tax bracket in retirement.
Right.
Or if you want to leave tax-advantaged assets to your heirs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They also talk about charitable giving,
Uh-huh.
which can be a good way to reduce your taxable estate.
Okay.
So things like QCDs.
What's a QCD?
Qualified charitable distributions from your IRA.
Mm-hmm.
Those can be very tax efficient.
Right.
Especially if you're over 70 and a half.
I see.
And then donor-advised funds are another option.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of those.
Yeah. They can give you immediate tax benefits.
Okay.
And you can spread out your charitable giving over time.
Right.
So it's a nice way to kind of, integrate your philanthropy
Uh-huh.
with your tax planning.
That's a good idea.
Now, there's also this concept called the step-up basis
Okay.
for capital gains on inherited assets.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know much about that?
Not really. Can you explain?
Yeah.
Sure. So when your heirs inherit assets like stocks or real estate, the value of those assets is basically stepped up to their fair market value
I see.
on the date of your death.
Oh, okay.
So let's say you bought a stock years ago
Right.
for $10 a share,
Uh-huh.
and now it's worth $100 a share.
Okay.
When you pass away,
Yeah.
your heirs inherit it at that $100 a share value.
Right.
So they wouldn't have to pay capital gains tax on all that appreciation.
Wow, that's a big benefit.
It can be, yeah.
That happened while you owned it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's a big deal for your beneficiaries.
All right, so the source also goes into some gifting strategies.
Oh, yeah, that's another important part of estate planning.
Okay.
So there's this thing called the annual gift tax exclusion, which lets you give a certain amount of money each year to each individual without having to pay any gift tax. So you can use that to gradually reduce the size of your taxable estate. And, they also mentioned 529 plans.
Oh, yeah, for education.
Yeah, for your grandchildren's education.
So those are considered gifts?
Well, contributions to 529 plans can be considered gifts.
Okay.
But they often have tax advantages.
Right.
And the earnings grow tax deferred.
That's great.
And then the withdrawals for qualified education expenses are tax free.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's a great way to help fund their education.
Makes sense.
And, potentially reduce your own taxes.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's something to consider.
All right, so let's tackle a topic that I know a lot of people find uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's important to address.
Yeah.
And that's final expenses.
Yeah. End-of-life costs.
The source suggests prepaying funeral costs.
That's right.
What do you think about that?
Well, it can definitely give you peace of mind, knowing that those costs are covered.
Yeah.
And it also protects against inflation.
Oh, right.
Because you're locking in the prices now.
That's a good point.
And, it also takes a burden off your family.
Yeah.
Because they won't have to deal with those financial decisions
right.
during a time of grief.
It makes things a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, exactly.
The source also mentions documenting your funeral wishes.
Oh, yeah. That's important, too.
So what kinds of things are we talking about there?
Well, things like burial versus cremation.
Okay.
What kind of service you want, any specific readings or music.
Right.
Just anything that's important to you.
So you're really spelling out how you want things to be handled.
That's right.
So there's no question.
Yeah, and it can help prevent disagreements among family members.
Well, that's a good point.
During a time when they're already grieving.
Right, exactly.
So it's best to be clear about your wishes.
And, of course, you want to make sure that there are enough funds available.
Yeah, absolutely.
To cover these expenses. Whether that's through life insurance or, dedicated savings.
Yeah, it's important to have a plan.
Now, switching gears a little bit.
Okay.
The Fazioli piece talks about the importance of asset protection.
Protecting what you've worked for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some of the strategies that they recommend?
Well, one thing is umbrella insurance.
Okay.
Which gives you extra liability protection, beyond your regular homeowners or auto insurance.
I see.
So if someone sues you, you have more coverage.
Okay, that's good to have.
Yeah, it can really protect your assets.
And they also talk about Medicaid planning.
They do, but that's a complex area.
Yeah.
It's really about, structuring your assets in a way that preserves your eligibility for Medicaid.
Okay.
If you need long-term care. But it's definitely something you want to talk to an expert about.
Right. It sounds complicated.
It can be, yeah.
Now let's think about retirement income.
Okay.
And how to make sure it's sustainable.
Yeah, that's crucial.
The source mentions the 4% rule.
Oh, yeah, that's a popular one.
Which suggests withdrawing 4%
right.
of your retirement savings each year.
Adjusted for inflation.
But it sounds like that's really just a guideline.
It is. It's not a hard and fast rule.
Right.
Because everyone's situation is different.
Yeah.
So you need to factor in your life expectancy, your spending needs, how your investments are doing.
Okay, all those things.
All of that.
And it's also important to look at any guaranteed income sources you have.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Things like Social Security, pensions, annuities.
Right.
To see how those fit into the picture.
Absolutely. Those can be really valuable.
Now, what about your investment portfolio in retirement?
Yeah, good question.
How does that change?
Well, typically, as you get older, you want to shift towards a more conservative approach.
Okay.
So instead of focusing on growth,
you're
more focused on preserving your capital.
Right.
And generating income.
I see.
So things like dividend-paying stocks and bonds.
Okay.
Become more attractive.
And you want to avoid anything too risky.
Yeah, you don't want to take big gambles.
Right.
When you're relying on that money to live on.
Yeah, it makes sense to be more conservative. And all of this planning is crucial.
It is.
But it seems like open communication with your family is also really important.
Oh, absolutely.
The source talks about that.
Yeah, they say you need to talk to your loved ones about your financial plans, your estate distribution, your end-of-life wishes.
Right.
Yeah, it can prevent a lot of problems down the road.
Yeah, if everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
And making sure they know where to find important documents.
Yeah, that's key.
Like your will, insurance policies, contact information for your advisors.
All of that.
That's just good practical advice.
Yeah, it can really help things go smoothly.
Now, the guide also brings up something that's becoming increasingly important.
And that's digital estate planning.
Oh, yeah, the digital age.
What is that exactly?
Well, it's about managing your online accounts.
Okay.
Your email, social media, banking, cloud storage.
That stuff.
Yeah. So you need to create a list of your usernames and passwords and give that to your executor.
Oh, I see.
And you also want to include instructions for how you want those accounts handled.
Right.
Do you want them closed, memorialized?
Right.
Do you want certain digital assets preserved?
I see. It's like a whole new layer of estate planning.
Yeah, it's something we all need to be thinking about.
Now, the source also touches on charitable giving and leaving a philanthropic legacy.
Yeah, if that's important to you.
Okay.
You can include bequests to charities in your will or trust.
I see.
And you can also set up things like private foundations or donor-advised funds if you want to have a more significant impact. Now, with all of this to think about, how often should people be reviewing and updating their plans?
Well, they recommend an annual checkup.
Okay.
At least. And then definitely after any major life events, like a birth, a death, a marriage, a divorce.
Makes sense.
Anything that could affect your plans.
And lastly, the source emphasizes protecting your surviving spouse or heirs.
Yes, that's crucial.
What are some key things to consider there?
Well, you want to make sure they'll have enough income.
Okay.
So, things like pensions, Social Security survivor benefits, life insurance, all of that.
Simplifying their finances?
Yeah, consolidate accounts, make things easy to manage.
And paying off debts.
Yeah, so they don't inherit a bunch of liabilities.
So it's really about making things as smooth as possible for them.
Exactly.
During a difficult time. And, of course, the force recommends working with professionals.
Oh, yeah, that's a must.
So who are the key players here?
Well, a financial advisor.
Okay.
An estate planning attorney. And a tax professional.
Makes sense. So a team of experts.
Yeah, they can guide you through the process.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that thinking ahead, planning for these later stages of life is so important.
Absolutely.
It's not just about managing money.
Yeah.
It's about peace of mind.
Yeah.
It's about quality of life. It's about making sure your loved ones are taken care of.
Right.
It's about leaving a legacy.
Absolutely.
And all the insights that we've discussed today are drawn from Fazioli Publishing's Retirement to Death Guide.
That's right.
So as you reflect on all of this, we encourage you to think about what actions you might need to take to get your own affairs in order.
Right.
And make sure that you and your loved ones are protected.
Absolutely.
And, it's worth exploring these topics in more detail.
Yeah.
And maybe even, seeking professional advice to make sure you're on the right track.
That's a great idea.
So thanks for joining us for this important deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.